Good day to you, YouTube. My name is Derek Broad, and I'm going to be your guide and host throughout these series of videos. And welcome to the first episode of the Writer's Emporium, where I do my best to give you as much help as I can in starting your next masterpiece. I am truly sorry, I haven't been posting any content over these past few weeks. I did explain it in the Gentleman's Corner video, but if you're not a subscriber to that channel, then it's really fine. In truth, I've really just found it hard to sit in front of a camera and kind of figure out my script and everything like that with my mother's birthday, my girlfriend's my anniversary, Christmas, and New Year's all packed into a very short amount of time. However, that's really enough about me. As the title suggests, this video is actually going to be concerning about starting your story. Now, a lot of us out there really do want to start writing, but we just don't know where or how to start. Now, even though it is a complicated and tenuous process, I am going to do my best to simplify it for you as much as I can. In my personal experience, when starting your story, it's going to be easiest to do it by answering the 5 W's and H: who, what, where, when, why, and how. Now, you do need to answer all of them in the creation of your story, but the manner and the order in which you do it is really up to you. However, where I like to start most of the time, and where we're actually going to be starting in this video, is actually with who. Now, this is relating to the creation of your characters, and personally where I like to start my works. Although there will be a later video that goes into more depth about character creation and development, this is still a good place to start. When you've created your characters, it's just generally going to be much easier to place them into a storyline, trust me. Now, you should be able to describe your main character almost as well as you describe yourself. It is your brainchild, after all. If you can't do that, they're just generally going to come across as flat or shallow or just flat or plain unenjoyable. And maybe that doesn't necessarily make them a bad character, just perhaps they would be better in a supporting role. In order to get this as perfect as you can, try to use people from your personal life, a friend perhaps, or your favorite fictional character, a favorite celebrity, or even yourself as creative inspiration. Do this, and trust me, answering who will be much, much easier for you. Next, we're going to move on to what. Now, this is a really common one, and it's in relation to plot creation and story creation. If you choose to start here, then it involves what the characters are really going to be doing in your story and the task that your story sets out to accomplish. If this is the first step of your creation, it makes answering pretty much all of them, all of the other questions, much, much easier. Especially who, really. If you already know your plotline and your story, then you know the role in which you kind of know the character roles, and therefore it's going to make it easier for character creation if you already know their role, and then everything kind of follows henceforth. The other W's probably follow easiest from this one as well. As I said, if you know the plotline and what's just generally going to happen, then character setting, timeline, motive, and method is just going to be so much easier for you. Where? Less common than the first two, but it's not as uncommon as you'd really think. Some people just like to write to a setting. For example, in my early days of writing, I wrote a story in ancient Rome, and it sucked. It was written about 6 years ago, and we don't talk about that story anymore, but you kind of understand my point. Write to a place that you always wanted to be, or you've always wanted to go. Now, this does make answering who easier because, personality is very dictated by, the society and timeline and everything like that. When is also made easier as well, since, to reference my previous example, if you're going to write in ancient Rome or something like that, then you know the general timeline that it's going to be set in. Excuse me. Next, we're going to actually move on to when. This question is more commonly started when you're writing fantasy, historical fiction, or really sci-fi. Answering this question dictates the timeline that your story is going to be set in. Now, it's not impossible to start with this question if you're writing outside of these three genres, but trust me, it's just going to be a lot harder. An example of starting your story with this question would be, I want to write something about how the future would turn out, like 1987 by George Orwell. or maybe the Hunger Games. Or I want to write my own little interpretation of history, like my ancient Rome. Or I want to write something that has swords and knights and dragons and stuff like that, but I know nothing more. Really, the list goes on. I would recommend starting with this question if you're planning on writing in the 3 previously stated genres, but it's really up to you. As to how it follows with the other questions, or the other question words, I guess you would call them, it really depends. Who, it can make much, much easier. As personal behavior, as I stated, is very dictated by timeline and setting and everything like that. Where is not as easy, but it can follow well if you're writing in a certain timeline. You can research the countries that existed in that timeline, like in 300 Anno Domini, the Romans were the most powerful country in the world, or something like that. But if you're creating a story where you're planning on world building, it's not a bad, where is actually pretty easy, but you're kind of on your own as to answering the other questions. Why? Okay, I will start with this. You cannot start with answering why. I tell you this now. This involves the reasoning behind character action. Why are they doing this, or why is this happening? Now, you need to answer at the very least what, and if you start, and actually what is necessary. What is absolutely necessary if you're going to be answering why. And if you started with who, where, or when, then you need to answer that, and then plus what, then why. You cannot explain why someone is doing something if you haven't already decided what they're doing. Generally, it's just basic logic. How? Now, the final question word. You cannot start with this one either. This involves how characters or how a task is accomplished, by whether it be a story or characters or whatever the case may be. But before you answer how, you also need to answer what first. And probably who, but that's not entirely necessary, but it is recommended. And then from there you can answer the other question words. Last is honestly just a personal tip. Get comfortable. This really just grab a cup of coffee and lay in your bed or something like that. Your best work is going to come out of when you feel like you can be the most productive. And when you feel like you can be the most productive, usually that happens in a specific environment or with a specific something. You know what it is. Whatever floats your boat, really. However, that's really all I've got for you guys today. I will see you guys at Facts, Philosophy, Physics. Oh my... Try saying that 5 times fast. But thank you, really, for tuning into the Writers Emporium, and please remember to like, comment, and subscribe below. But really, until then, folks.